The area now known as Ethiopia is thought by many scholars to be the region where early Homo sapiens first emerged in the Middle Paleolithic period about 150–200,000 years ago. The oldest hominid fossils ever discovered were found in Ethiopia in 1994 and date from 4.2 meters years ago and are known as Ardi, Ardipithecus ramidus. The more well-known fossil remains of Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, date from 3.2 meters years ago and were discovered in 1974. The oldest stone tools ever discovered anywhere in the world were found in 2010 and dated at 3M years old. Fossilized animal bones with stone tool-inflicted marks have also been found in Ethiopia dating from 3.4 years ago. Contacts with ancient Egypt Ethiopia is believed by many scholars to be the land of Punt, described by Egyptian chroniclers as a trading partner from over 5,000 years ago. Myrrh, ivory, animal skins, and gold were imported from Punt. This trade followed routes along the Nile and the Red Sea coast, pre-Axumite Yeha. The kingdom of DMT, with its capital at Yeha, was the first kingdom known to have existed and dates from around the 10th century BCE, equivalent to BC before the Common Current era. A Sabian-style temple was built there around 800 BCE and is the oldest standing structure in sub-Saharan Africa. Scholars associate Sabian culture with the area that is modern-day Yemen, Aksumite Empire. The Diamet kingdom was succeeded by the Aksumite Empire around the 1st century BCE, with some scholars placing its origin around 400 BCE. Persian writer Mani, 216–274 CE, listed Aksum with Rome, Persia, and China as the 4 great powers of his era. Christianity was introduced by Frumentius in 330 CE. Frumentius, who was born in Syria, converted Aksumite king Ezana in 356 CE. Under Ezana and his son Caleb, the Aksumite Empire was at its peak and growing rich and powerful from trade routes linking India and ancient Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean with the Byzantine Empire in the Mediterranean Sea. Its territories extended from modern Somalia and the Indian Ocean coast, across the Red Sea to the southern Arabian Peninsula, and north up to the border with the Roman Empire and Egypt. Near the end of the 5th century CE, a group of missionary monks known as the Nine Saints arrived from Syria, Greece, and Constantinople. They had a huge influence on the history and culture of Ethiopia and the development of Orthodox Christianity in the centuries that followed. The last Axumite coins were minted in the 7th century CE. The reasons for the empire's fall are not clear. It has been attributed to a persistent drought, overgrazing, deforestation, plague, or a shift in trade routes. Ethiopian Middle Ages, Zagwe dynasty, 900–1270. The Zagwe dynasty was based around Lalibela, the city of rock-hewn churches that now bears the name of this dynasty's most famous king. Much is still unknown about this period. Early Solomonic period, 1270–1529. Yekuno Amlak deposed the last of the Zagwe kings, married his daughter, and established a dynasty of kings, claiming legitimacy as male line of descendants of the Axumite kings, and therefore continuing the Solomonic line from Solomon and Sheba. In this period, Ethiopia again expanded militarily to dominate the Horn of Africa. The arts and literature also advanced, despite the lack of a fixed capital, as emperors continually moved around the empire in mobile camps. The Portuguese influence. Portuguese missions to Ethiopia started from the 15th century. There had for many years been a legend in Europe of a Christian king in the Far East known as Prester John. Various expeditions had been sent to find him. Pero de Covilla arrived on such a mission in 1490. He remained until 1507, when the regent Queen Eleni sent a request to the King of Portugal for military support against the Muslim armies to the east. In 1520, a Portuguese fleet arrived in the Red Sea and met with Emperor Lebna Dengel, remaining in Ethiopia for about 6 years. Father Francisco Alvarez, 1465–1541, was a member of this delegation. He traveled widely and wrote the first Western accounts of Ethiopia. The Abyssinian, Adal War, 1529–1543. From 1528–1540. Muslim armies from the Sultanate of Adal in the southeast ran 3/4 of the Abyssinian kingdom. Their leader was known as Mohammed Gran, Mohammed the Left-Handed. From hiding, the Ethiopian emperor appealed to the Portuguese for help. A Portuguese fleet arrived from India in 1541 with 400 musketeers. About 2 years later, Mohammed Gran was killed in battle, and his forces were routed. The Portuguese then put pressure on the Ethiopian king to publicly profess allegiance to the Pope in Rome. The emperor refused. Early Gondar period, 1632–1769. In the years that followed the defeat of Mohammed Gran, the Portuguese steadily increased their influence and power until the conversion to Roman Catholicism of Emperor Susenyos, 1572–1632 in 1622. This resulted in a period of violence and open rebellion against the new religion. Susenyos eventually abdicated in favor of his son Fasilides, who reinstated the Orthodox faith as the state religion and expelled the Portuguese Jesuit priests. Emperor Fasilides established Gondar as Ethiopia's third permanent capital after Aksum and Lalibela in 1636. In this period, each king after Fasil, including Queen Mentawab, built a fortified castle residence in what is now referred to as Fasil Gebi, which loosely translates as Fasil's compound. This is why Gondar is sometimes called the Camelot of Africa. A wall with 12 gates surrounds this royal enclosure. Gondar was the capital for the next 2 centuries until, upon his coronation, Emperor Tewodros II moved the capital to his fortress at Magdala in 1855. Zemene Mesafint, Age of the Princes, 1769–1855. This was a period of great instability and division when a succession of 23 emperors held the throne. There was no powerful central authority uniting and controlling the warring princes and provincial kings who continuously fought each other. They competed to extend their own lands at each other's expense and be seen as the guardians of whoever was the current, but nominal, King of Kings, enthroned at Gondar. This period ended in 1855 with the coronation of Tewodros II, b. 1818–1868, after he militarily defeated all his rival princes. Full imperial power was once again in the hands of one leader, and the history of modern Ethiopia began. Modern period, 1855–1936. The reigns of emperors: Tewodros II reigned 1855–68, Johannes IV R. 1872–1889, and Menelik II R. 1889–1913 were during a period when Ethiopia started to open up to the world. Tewodros II R. 1855–1868. Despite resistance from some provincial leaders, Tewodros II started to modernize and centralize imperial administration. After writing to Queen Victoria and other European imperial leaders, but not receiving a reply, Tewodros felt insulted and took some Europeans hostage. This ended very badly in 1868, when the British sent a huge military expedition of 13,000 soldiers, 26,000 men for logistical support, and 40,000 animals, including war elephants from India. This expedition was led by General Napier, 1810–1890. Their 280 sail and steamships landed on the Red Sea coast, and a road was built into the interior. Elephants hauled heavy artillery up into the mountains from the coastal plain. It took 3 months to trek the 640-kilometer to the mountaintop fortress at Magdala. Tewodros' last-minute offer to return the hostages with a peace offering of large numbers of cattle and sheep was rejected by Napier, who wanted Tewodros' full surrender, when all was obviously lost. Rather than surrender to the British, who had been secretly supported along the expedition route by rebellious princes who sought his throne, Tewodros shot himself with a pistol given to him by Queen Victoria. Magdala was looted, and Tewodros' son was taken by the British to London. There, he was known as Prince Alameyu of Abyssinia, and he came under the protection of Queen Victoria. He was sent to the prestigious Rugby Public School and even enrolled at Royal Sandhurst Military Academy, but died, aged 18, in 1879. To this day, there is a brass plaque in his memory at the Royal Chapel in Windsor. Tewodros II is considered a great national hero by Ethiopians. Johannes IV Sur R. 1872-1889. The reign of Emperor Johannes IV, B. 1837-1889, was dominated by war with Egypt and the Mahdists of Sudan. It was also a time of increasing engagement with European powers, especially Italy, who, through a series of land purchases and treaties, established a colony on the Red Sea coast in what is now Eritrea. Johannes was killed by a stray bullet in a battle in which his forces were victorious against the Mahdists in 1889. This prompted King Sahle Mariam of Shewa to declare himself Emperor Menelik II of Ethiopia. Menelik II, NAR 1889-1913. Menelik's reign, B. 1844-1913, saw the empire expand to the south, west, and east by conquest and negotiation. In 1889, he signed the Treaty of Wuchale with the Italians, but the Italians secretly changed the Italian language version. On discovering this trickery, Menelik demanded the Italians change the key clauses. The Italians refused and invaded Ethiopia from their coastal colony in Eritrea. The Italian army was destroyed at the Battle of Adwa in 1896. Victory at Adwa Day is a national holiday, celebrated on 2nd March, European calendar. It was the first time an African army had defeated a European colonial invasion in open battle. Menelik II is considered the father of modern Ethiopia. He built diplomatic relations with European powers, including notably Russia. He encouraged modernization and development, including the Djibouti to Addis Ababa railway line built by the French. He established the first bank and postal system and brought electricity to the new capital, which he founded and named Addis Ababa, meaning new flower. Under his reign, the first telephone and telegraph service was set up, and the first cars were seen in Ethiopia. Menelik's death in 1913 was followed by a period of intrigue and plotting at the royal court. Menelik's unpopular grandson Iyasu V, who succeeded him, was deposed by the nobles in 1916. He was followed by Menelik's daughter, Empress Zewditu, and her cousin Ras Tafari Makanen, who became regent. Ras can translate as head, duke, or lord. Ras Tafari Makanen succeeded to the throne in 1930 and changed his name to Haile Selassie I. Haile Selassie reign, Art 1930-1974. His full royal title was His Imperial Majesty, Haile Selassie I, conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, king of kings of Ethiopia, and elect of God. Having been regent from 1916, Haile Selassie B by 1892-1975 was crowned as emperor in 1930. He went into exile after the initially successful fascist Italian invasion of 1935. In his appeal for help to the League of Nations, he famously asked, "What answer shall I take back to my people?" and warned prophetically, "It is us today. It will be you tomorrow." He became an icon of pre-war anti-fascism and was named 1935 Man of the Year by Time magazine. There were only 6 nations in the League that refused to recognize Italy's occupation of Ethiopia in 1937: New Zealand, USA, Mexico, China, Soviet Union, and Spain. In 1941, Haile Selassie returned from exile after the Italians had been expelled with the support of the British Army, now at war with Germany and Italy. The Ethiopian resistance had been continuously active during the occupation. They are remembered as the patriotic heroes and heroines of the Arbegnok. After the war, Haile Selassie set about modernizing Ethiopia. He invited ordinary Italian soldiers to remain and contribute to rebuilding Ethiopia. Many did, building respected families and businesses with their Ethiopian wives. Haile Selassie was a feudal monarch, and most Ethiopians were peasant farmers, living under the power of local, landed aristocrats. His was the final word on major decisions, but he did face significant resistance to some of his reforms from the nobles and clergy, especially on tax and land matters. He took a special interest in education and appointed himself Minister of Education, establishing the first university and many schools. An elected parliament was granted limited powers by the 1955 Constitution, which still maintained the indisputable power of the monarch. Haile Selassie helped start the Organization of African Unity in 1963, now known as the African Union, and was its first official chairperson. The African Union headquarters continues to be in Addis Ababa, leading to Ethiopia being known as the diplomatic capital of Africa. In 1960, an attempted coup was crushed by the military and lacked popular support. However, there was sympathy for change among students and some members of the educated elite. This is considered a major moment in recent Ethiopian history, as this was the first time the emperor's absolute right to rule without the people's consent was questioned. The increased advocacy for the rights of the peasantry and poor, especially from students, spurred Haile Selassie to speed up his reforms. Students were at the center of calls for reform in the 1960s and 70s. Resentment grew amongst the rural poor at the nobility's successful resistance to land reform. Increasingly, Haile Selassie focused on foreign affairs and left national affairs to his prime ministers. While his prestige grew internationally, there were growing problems at home. A major famine in 1972 that killed up to 300,000 people was, at first, denied by the imperial government. There was widespread outrage at this delay in asking the world for help. This famine was famously exposed to the outside world in 1973 by Jonathan Dimbleby's British television documentary called The Unknown Famine. History repeated itself in 1984 with Michael Björk's BBC television reports from northern Ethiopia. Björk's initial reports are credited with stimulating the international community to respond on a massive scale, including Band-Aid and Live Aid. But by 1974, Ethiopia was on the verge of revolution. Ethiopia's communist era, 1974-91, the military coup on 22nd September 1974 saw the aging emperor publicly humiliated by being escorted from the imperial palace in a VW Beetle car. He was not initially harmed. A military council known as the Derg took power and summarily executed 59 members of the former imperial government. Haile Selassie died in 1975. Many believe he was strangled in the basement of his palace by, or at the orders of, Layet Kol Mengistu Haile Mariam, who then systematically murdered his rivals on the military council and established himself as undisputed head of state by 1977. The new Marxist government made social reforms and nationalized the assets of the church, aristocracy, and landowners. Financially supported by the Soviet Union, Ethiopia became a totalitarian state and greatly increased the size of its military. Cuban soldiers came and fought alongside Ethiopian soldiers against some of the regional rebellions that followed this upheaval. Ties with the USA were cut. In this milieu, in 1977, Somalia invaded the eastern Ethiopian territory known as the Ogaden. This invasion was only repelled with a huge airlift of Soviet weapons and the support of 17,000 Cuban soldiers. The Red Terror of 1977-78 was a time of extreme bloodshed when hundreds of thousands of accused enemies of the Derg were tortured and killed. Today, there's a museum to this dark period in Addis Ababa. The regime's overall brutality, the policy of forced villagization, pushing farmers onto collective farms, famine, collapse of the regime's main sponsor, the Soviet Union, and many regional rebellions led to the rebel military victory in 1991. Mengistu fled to be the guest of his erstwhile supporter Mugabe in Zimbabwe. He still lives there, despite being found guilty of genocide by Ethiopian courts. Mengistu is considered responsible for the deaths of up to 2,000 Ethiopians. Ethiopia, a federal democratic republic from 1991. In 1991, an alliance of northern rebel groups militarily defeated the Derg's forces, which had been weakened by the collapse of the Soviet Union. In a referendum that followed this victory, Eritrea voted for full independence from Ethiopia and became an independent state in 1993 after about 30 years of guerrilla war. The 1994 Constitution created the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. In 1995, Prime Minister Meles Zenawi and a multi-party parliament were elected in the first of the 5 yearly elections that have followed. The federation consists of 14 national states reflecting ethnic and cultural territories. The elected state governments are responsible for everything except defense, foreign affairs, and economic policy. Addis Ababa and Dire Dawa are two federal city-states with their own government. Market reforms were introduced, and many government businesses were privatized with some notable exceptions, including the successful and efficiently run Ethio, Telecom, Ethiopian Airlines, and the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia. There are now many private banks. Massive state investment in infrastructure such as roads and hydroelectricity generation has attracted growing levels of foreign investment. Marxist-era land reform saw all land go into government ownership, and this is still the case. More than 40 universities have been built across the country to offer higher education to the 50% of Ethiopians that are aged below 18. A key challenge is finding employment for the burgeoning numbers of skilled graduates. Ethiopia is seen as a major African economic success story. In recent years, starting from a low base, as one of the poorest countries on the continent. The World Bank reports that in 2000, 56% of the population lived on less than 1.25 per day. This was reduced to 30% by 2011. From 2004 to 2014, economic growth has averaged 10.8%. Addis Ababa recently opened the first urban electric-powered light rail system anywhere in Africa. The 800-kilometer Addis Ababa to the port of Djibouti railway line has been electrified and rebuilt for fast trains. Djibouti is a small independent state, and all of landlocked Ethiopia's maritime exports and imports pass through this port. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, under construction since 2011, on the Blue Nile will be the largest hydroelectric dam in Africa and seventh largest in the world. Egypt feared control of the headwaters of the Blue Nile, which carries 80% of the water in the Nile River that flows onto Egypt. This resulted in the Ethiopian government having difficulty gaining finance for the USD 5 billion project. Despite this, Ethiopia pressed ahead and largely financed the project itself. Egypt has since signed an agreement with the Ethiopia. There continue to be some challenges, including a fast-growing population, unreliable rainfall, and sometimes civil unrest around land reform issues. For example, the government's long-term goal of national food self-sufficiency has seen some international agrotech companies granted long-term leases on large tracts of prime agricultural land, which some farmers say has disadvantaged them. Overall economic policy is based on the climate-resilient green economic strategy, which has been held up as an international example of the way forward for developing countries by UN Development Program head and former three-term NZ Prime Minister Helen Clark. Prime Minister Meles Zenawi died in office in 2012. He was succeeded as executive head of government by his then Deputy Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn. Ado, male, honorific like Mr. Mulatu Teshome is president and ceremonial head of state. Conclusion: Ethiopia is rapidly developing into a middle-income country. Many members of the diaspora are returning and investing in the growing economy. The Ethiopian Renaissance, after years of difficulties, is a testament to the courage and resilience of her people. Despite the challenges faced by this great nation, there is a palpable sense of positivity and optimism amongst the people. This is not only in economic terms, but in the proud traditional culture and blossoming of contemporary creativity in cinema, theater, visual arts, and music. Ethiopia is just starting to hit its stride, which makes it a great time to visit.